What happens when the highest court in the land suddenly slams the brakes on a president's boldest economic move? Well, that's exactly what just happened. And the ripple effect? It's rattling Wall Street, confusing global allies, and leaving American industries hanging in the balance. So buckle in, this isn't just about tariffs. It's about power, politics, and a battle that's far from over. Before we dive deep into this explosive decision, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth breakdowns you won't find anywhere else. Just a few weeks ago, President Donald Trump was in the Oval Office, laying out what he called a game-changing plan, sweeping tariffs on multiple countries, aimed at protecting American industries and reclaiming jobs lost overseas. It was bold, aggressive, and to his supporters long overdue. But fast forward to today, and everything has changed. In a stunning move, the Supreme Court has blocked that very tariff initiative, throwing the entire strategy into uncertainty. Washington was rocked, markets spiraled, and international partners scrambling to figure out what the US would do next. But here's the real twist. This isn't just about economics. It's about whether the president overstepped his legal boundaries and what that means for the future of presidential power. At the center of it all lies a critical legal debate. Did President Trump go too far? According to the Supreme Court, yes. Chief Justice Maria Delgado, writing for the majority, didn't mince words. The Trade Expansion Act of 1962 gives the president some authority to tweak tariffs, but only under strict conditions, like national emergencies or unfair trade practices. In this case, those triggers weren't met, and the court ruled that by bypassing them, Trump essentially acted like a lawmaker, not a president. In short, the executive order that launched these tariffs was declared unconstitutional in overreach. Reactions were immediate and fierce. Critics of the administration celebrated the ruling as a vital defense of constitutional checks and balances. But Trump loyalists? They called it a blatant act of judicial activism, a court stepping into policy and undermining the will of the people. And then, the market spoke. The Dow plunged. Major companies like Caterpillar, Ford, and Tesla, who had been counting on the tariffs to reshape global competition, saw their stocks take a nosedive. For them, what was supposed to be a renaissance for American manufacturing turned into a nightmare of volatility. Behind closed doors, panic was setting in. Top trade officials, including the U.S. Trade Representative and Treasury Secretary Danielle Wu, rushed to contain the damage. They pleaded with foreign governments not to retaliate, insisting that the administration still believed in fair, balanced trade deals. But the international community wasn't exactly reassured, especially with political tensions rising by the hour. Meanwhile, economists issued stark warnings. Marcus Reyes, the dean of the Wharton School, didn't hold back. This level of uncertainty is toxic for business. Companies, he warned, need predictability to invest and grow, and right now, America looks like a ship with no captain. And it wasn't just big corporations feeling the heat. Small factories, especially in the heartland, were being whiplashed by the chaos. Some firms began hedging more aggressively against commodity volatility, while others explored relocating production facilities to countries with more stable trade relations. The ripple effect stretched beyond Wall Street, and manufacturing hubs, insurance firms, pension funds, and multinational banks began issuing guidance to clients about the heightened risks associated with abrupt policy reversals stemming from executive legislative friction. On Capitol Hill, the ruling triggered a series of urgent hearings. The House Committee on Ways and Means summoned constitutional experts and trade officials to testify on the limits of executive power in economic affairs. Republican committee members, many aligned with the administration's nationalist agenda, pressed witnesses on whether the judiciary had hamstrung America's ability to compete. Democrats, meanwhile, emphasized the importance of returning trade policy to a deliberative, transparent process grounded in law rather than executive fiat. Even among career diplomats, the implications were profound. Ambassadors from allied nations expressed cautious optimism that the US might return to a more collaborative model of trade engagement. This decision, remarked one EU envoy, suggests that America is reasserting its legal foundations. That's a positive signal for those of us who seek stable, rules-based commerce. Still, for the administration, the road ahead remained steep. President Trump's advisors scrambled to reframe the setback as a temporary obstacle rather than a fatal blow. Aides hinted at revised executive orders crafted to pass legal muster, possibly by invoking national security provisions with more rigorous justification. Meanwhile, pressure from domestic industries continued to mount. Agricultural lobbies, in particular, warned of a perilous season ahead. Soybean and corn exporters had been banking on retaliatory tariffs, being lifted something now delayed indefinitely. With foreign buyers hesitant and futures markets unsettled, some Midwest farmers began considering early exit strategies from international contracts, fearing they might be left holding the bag. In a televised address, President Trump struck a defiant tone. "The Supreme Court made a mistake," he declared. "We will not let foreign interests dictate our policies. We will find a way to protect American jobs with or without the court's blessing." The speech, though cheered by loyalists, did little to calm investor nerves. Market analysts saw it as a sign of brewing constitutional confrontation rather than economic reassurance. Think tanks and editorial boards quickly took sides. Conservative commentators on cable news argued the decision undermined strong leadership in a moment of global economic transition. Progressive voices praised the judiciary for stepping in before the country veered too far into executive overreach. Meanwhile, centrist think tanks called for a long overdue overhaul of trade legislation, modern, flexible, and bipartisan. At the heart of it all remained an unresolved tension: how to maintain a competitive, sovereign trade strategy while respecting the framework of checks and balances designed to prevent any one branch from dominating. In classrooms, courtrooms, boardrooms, and union halls, Americans were once again debating not just what kind of trade policy the country should pursue, but who gets to decide. And so, as legal experts pored over precedents and lawmakers drafted new bills, one truth had become undeniable: the era of unchecked tariff powers had ended. Whether that marked the beginning of a more stable and constitutional approach or simply a new arena of political conflict remained to be seen. They warned that any resurgence of abrupt trade barriers, or even the threat of such policies, could deter foreign suppliers from engaging in long-term contracts with American firms. One partner at a prominent VC firm noted that we can't build a resilient semiconductor ecosystem with shifting goalposts every election cycle. Major tech companies lobbied Congress directly, advocating for clauses that would exempt strategic sectors from tariff fluctuations and requesting expanded public-private partnerships to strengthen domestic chip production. Industry groups such as the Semiconductor Industry Association joined forces with national security think tanks to argue that stability in trade frameworks was no longer just an economic issue, it was a matter of technological sovereignty. Amid all this, the Biden administration, still navigating post-election uncertainty and preparing for a potential second Trump candidacy, struggled to define its public stance. Internally, memos leaked from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative revealed disagreements over how far to push new legislation, with some aides urging aggressive revision of Section 232 authorities, and others counseling restraint to avoid triggering further backlash from Trump-aligned voters. The political calculus was delicate. With midterms on the horizon and campaign surrogates already fanning out across battleground states, both parties were acutely aware that public opinion on trade had shifted dramatically. Voters remained skeptical of globalization, but also wary of the economic turbulence caused by its sudden unwinding. Polls conducted by the Pew Research Center and Gallup showed nuanced sentiment. A majority of Americans supported tougher measures against unfair foreign competition, but also demanded transparency, accountability, and a stable policy environment. Trade, once considered a niche policy area, had become a flashpoint for broader anxieties about inflation, inequality, national identity, and America's role in a fragmented world order. In the weeks following the Supreme Court decision, House and Senate committees launched a series of hearings aimed at reassessing the architecture of U.S. trade law. Experts testified about legal ambiguities, historical precedents, economic models, and global power dynamics. C-SPAN broadcast packed sessions in which scholars, CEOs, farmers, and labor leaders offered sometimes conflicting, sometimes aligned visions of what a just and effective trade policy should look like in the 21st century. One striking moment came when a fourth-generation soybean farmer from Iowa, who had previously testified in favor of the original tariffs, told lawmakers he had lost $1.2 million due to contract cancellations triggered by policy reversals. "We want a level playing field," he said, "but more than that, we want a steady one." As consensus began to coalesce around the idea of reform, the challenge remained translating principles into durable legislation. Lawmakers proposed a new National Trade Stability Act, which would require any executive action on tariffs to undergo a multi-agency review, provide economic impact assessments, and trigger automatic legislative review after 90 days. Though still in early stages, the draft drew tentative praise from across the aisle and signaled a rare window for bipartisan cooperation. Still, few believed the debate was nearing resolution. The sudden eruption of international negotiations, some cooperative, some confrontational, continued to shift the global chessboard. And as Wall Street digested every new signal out of Washington, corporate America and Main Street alike braced for what many now called the new trade era. A world where the rules were not only being rewritten, but publicly litigated, politically contested, and increasingly shaped by forces far beyond the borders of traditional economics. Would you like the next part to transition into how these developments impacted US foreign relations or domestic political campaigns? Yet patience abroad was wearing thin. In Brussels, EU commissioners quietly floated the prospect of reviving dormant retaliatory tariffs should the US resume aggressive trade actions without consultation. In Beijing, policymakers hardened their rhetoric, suggesting that any return to unilateralism would be met not just with proportional measures, but with strategic decoupling in sensitive sectors such as rare earth minerals and battery supply chains. Meanwhile, in Brazil and Indiatwo economies with growing regional influence leaders emphasized the importance of multilateral stability and pushed for stronger roles within the WTO dispute resolution mechanism. These international moves underscored a growing realization: global trust in the consistency of American trade policy was eroding. As one European trade official bluntly put it in an off-the-record briefing, "Every time a new administration enters office, we're forced to guess what the rules are. That's not partnership, it's roulette." Back home, the economic data began to reflect the downstream consequences of this uncertainty. Capital goods orders showed erratic patterns, fluctuating sharply in sectors exposed to global supply chain. Small and medium-sized enterprises, lacking the legal resources of multinationals, reported increased exposure to compliance risks and shifting import costs. A national survey conducted by the Chamber of Commerce found that nearly 60% of mid-sized manufacturers had delayed or canceled planned expansions due to uncertainty over tariff frameworks. In education and research circles, business schools began updating curricula to include policy volatility modules in trade and operations classes, teaching future executives to navigate not just market dynamics, but political and legal ambiguity as enduring features of global commerce. Still, voices of optimism remained. Some officials in the Department of Commerce viewed the current turbulence as a necessary, if painful, stage in recalibrating the country's trade posture for the 21st century. One deputy undersecretary likened the situation to a tectonic shift. "The landscape is shaking because the ground underneath has changed. We're building the rules for a different Erewhon defined not by Cold War-era institutions, but by rapid technological change and multipolar competition." As Congress continued its deliberations and stakeholders refined their positions, the public conversation evolved yet again. Commentators noted that the question was no longer whether tariffs were good or bad, but whether the nation could develop a trade framework resilient enough to accommodate economic, legal, and geopolitical complexity without sacrificing transparency or democratic legitimacy. Would you like me to continue the script into how the debate begins influencing election platforms or impacts the 2026 midterms? Now, as the executive branch signals a pivot toward more narrowly targeted trade measures and Congress intensifies debate over sweeping reform, foreign governments are grappling with their own strategic crossroads. Behind closed doors in capitals around the world, leaders ask the same difficult question: how do we engage with a United States that oscillates between negotiation and unilateral force without appearing weak or naive? In response, many have begun pushing for the revival of high-level economic summits, ministerial trade talks, and technical forums to rebuild shattered trust and resolve lingering disputes before they escalate into economic warfare. Back home, the intellectual battleground ignited. A torrent of white papers flooded out of policy institutes, each dissecting the legal, economic, and constitutional fallout from the Supreme Court's ruling. A prominent Brookings Institution analysis concluded that judicial checks on executive overreach often lead to a healthier balance of power and more serious legislative engagement. In stark contrast, a Cato Institute report warned that excessive judicial intervention could cripple America's ability to swiftly counteract foreign manipulation, even calling for constitutional amendments to clearly enshrine executive power in national economic defense. This wasn't just about steel tariffs or aluminum duties anymore, this was about the very soul of modern American governance. The fight over trade policy had become a referendum on presidential authority, congressional responsibility, and the role of the courts in a global economy defined by volatility and complexity. As the midterm elections loomed, trade policy was no longer a back-page issue, it was front and center. Candidates flooded battleground states, from Rust Belt factories to rural farms, arguing over two competing visions: defend and protect American industries at all costs, or re-establish a stable, rules-based trade system that restores predictability. Town halls exploded with energy. Voters understood what was at stake: real jobs, real costs, real futures. Meanwhile, legal battles raged on as states filed friend-of-the-court briefs, demanding clarity and constraints on executive power. The pressure was building. And now, it's your move. Enough with passive politics. This is your economy, your industry, your paycheck. Speak up, show up, vote. Known. Whether you stand for bold protectionism or demand a return to reliable trade, the power to shape America's path isn't in Washington, it's in your hands. This is the crossroads. You can stay silent and let others decide, or you can rise up and demand a trade policy that works for workers, for businesses, and for the future of this country. Don't wait, get informed, take a stand, and make your voice impossible to ignore.